Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. An ongoing activity. The director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 19th day of October in the year 2016. We are within 3 weeks of the election, which is scheduled for November 8th, 3 weeks from yesterday. So we've reached the point where we're rapidly moving down toward the end of the third week before D-Day. And of course, the fact of the matter is, early voting in West Virginia begins on the 26th, which is next Wednesday. So, and it continues up until Saturday, the 5th of November, the Saturday before the election. I personally think that the real focus is going to be on the early voting. I suspect that early voting is going to be up. I think I've talked to a lot of people who are saying that they're really afraid that if they wait till the very last minute to vote, something obviously could happen, which would keep them from getting to the polls. So they're kind of laying for the polls to open on the 26th so they can vote early. So my thinking is that with that kind of sentiment and the fact that early voting extends from a Wednesday all the way to the following Saturday, that we could have a fairly representative, strong sample of the kind of turnout we're going to have in the early elections. I could be wrong, but because we've had early voting before, but I'm sensing that early voting this time is becoming more and more significant to more people. And of course, the purpose of it is to increase the size of the vote, increase make it easier for people to vote. That, of course, explains why Republicans in so many states are looking for ways to shorten the period of early voting, because they realize that the longer the polls, the more days the polls are open, the larger the turnout. And of course, what that means is that most of the people who would take advantage of this extended time would be probably voting Democrat, and that's the concern that they have. But anyway, today is the 19th day of October. It is the third day, consecutive day, that we've been live here at the Virtual Center, and I really appreciate that. With the campaign less than 3 weeks away, I really am fairly comfortable that I think we've done pretty well. And I know a number of listeners had contacted me and dropped emails asking me if I was going to be gone for a period of time prior to the election. And I haven't planned to do that. In fact, my focus has been on trying, just in case something like that can become necessary. I wanted to get in as many programs as possible. So I feel really good about the fact that after today, we will have completed a full week of broadcasts here at the Virtual Center. Once again, I want to remind you that we do have a phone number, and the purpose of it is to make it possible for you to get on the air and share your thoughts with our other listeners, not just with me, but with our other listeners. Because obviously, if we're going to have an interactive discussion, then the more participants in it, the better. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me in an email, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And I do remind you once again of our Facebook page. It's been a couple of days. I haven't put anything on it since the weekend, I will admit. But actually, depending on our program today, as I was looking over materials in preparation for the program today, I began to see some possibilities, a couple of possibilities at least, for putting something on Facebook. And my thinking is that if we do indeed cover the issues that I think we're going to cover today, I think that at least in one case, and perhaps two, there is room for an entry on our Facebook page. And in fact, as I say that, it occurs to me that one of the things we're going to be dealing with today is the continuation of the civil rights issue between Booker T. Washington, and W.E.B. Du Bois. And it's Du Bois that we need to get to. I will take a few moments and kind of review with an overview of Booker T. Washington's presentation at the Atlanta Compromise speech in 1895, because I think that background and that context is very important, because it's to that speech that Du Bois is directing his attention and his criticism of Booker T. Washington. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, and I will mention it again, I think that when we complete this particular issue, this particular topic, what I have learned over the years, I've taught these two documents, the Souls of Black Folk and the Atlanta Compromise speech, in history classes for a number of years. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, depending on the depth with which students are willing to wrestle with these issues, that one's understanding of civil rights in this country is going to benefit no more than from these two documents. I have actually had students say in class, these two documents probably tell us as much about civil rights in this country as anyone would need to know. I agree. And in fact, I've taken that particular comment from that particular student and used it to justify continuation of an emphasis on these two particular documents. In fact, what I had done for several years was assign a comparative essay on these two documents to students, and give them the opportunity to wrestle with them on their own and see what they could come up with in terms of the analysis and the comparison of the two strategies and the assumptions and implications of both of them. And that's what I want to get into today as well. It seems to me that there is indeed an opportunity to put some of this on Facebook as well, because I don't think that there's any issue in our society more important and more potentially divisive than the question of race. For a long time, I've tried to convince myself that the real issue is class, not race. But over the last several months, with the violence in our cities and such, it seems to me that the racial question looms. And of course, the election, this particular election, and especially Donald Trump's campaign, has pretty much underlined the importance of gender, of gender discrimination in our society as well. I think, very honestly, in terms of what the founders hoped to accomplish in this particular republic, I think we have quite a long way to go. So again, I direct you to our Facebook page. There are a number of postings on there. And I think the last one that I put on there was the postscript of my own campaign, which I put together over the weekend. And I think we went through that particular document on Monday, a couple of days ago. So again, if you are interested in looking at our Facebook page, and I encourage you to do that, just go to Facebook, the homepage, and in the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. And the most recent postings come first, and they basically, as you progress down, scroll down, you will see that the postings become older and older, progressively earlier and earlier. Again, there's no question that I want to address the Booker T. Washington issue today as well. One of the and I want to complete it, and I think if we can do that, I'd like to get into that in our first hour, because I want to make sure that we finish it before we end our week of live broadcasts here at the Virtual Center. So with that, let's pick up where we left off with Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech. We talked yesterday in review about the context of that speech, the industrialization of the New South, and the choices that the South had to make after the Civil War. There was every reason to believe that the South was going to industrialize and become much more like the North after the fall, the end of slavery. And the thinking was that the South is ripe for post-Civil War investment. Much of the investment capital that existed in the North the thinking would be ripe and lucrative for investment in the industrialization of the South. Many people believed that with the end of the war and the demise of slavery, that opened the way for industrialism to take off in the South. And many people believed that industrialism, the industrialization of the South, was one of the potentially most lucrative investments that investment capital could ever find. So the fact of the matter is there was all sorts of investment potential in the industrialization of the South. The Atlanta Compromise speech, in large part, was a reflection of that reality from the perspective of Southern industrialists who really believed, I think, that they were on the cusp of the kind in their lifetimes. But the fact of the matter is that they had an internal problem. And the problem was the millions of ex-slaves that had been freed at the end of the war. And so the question is, what is the New South going to do with the millions of ex-slaves within its midst? And it's into that context that Booker T. Washington sees opportunities for Black Americans. Namely, if he can arrange a deal, a quid pro quo, as it were, that will encourage them to admit African Americans into the industrialization process by committing to make the jobs at the lower end of the spectrum available to Black Americans, then his position is that if all of us, Black and white, together, and real growth, then the potential of Southern development is really unlimited. But Washington's concern is a racial one. In fact, will the white South be willing to torpedo segregation? Many states are enacting segregation legislation. Some of you may recall that it was 1892, 3 years before this Atlanta Compromise speech of 1895, that the Supreme Court made a decision excuse me, I'm wrong. It was 3 years after the Atlanta Compromise speech. It was 1898 that the Supreme Court made its decision in Plessy versus Ferguson and ruled that accommodations could be separate and still be equal. In other words, the phrase that came out of this is separate but equal. What the Supreme Court did then was endorse the legitimacy of segregation. And my point is that's the threat that Washington's compromise was intended to head off, I believe. I believe he saw it coming. I believe he saw many of the southern states enacting laws that separated the races. And Washington's realization was that if we're going to be kept separate and outside the industrial process, then my people, Black Americans, will forever be denied the opportunities that industrial expansion presents. Not only that, but Washington realized that industrialization required labor. It meant jobs, lots of jobs, industrial jobs, good paying jobs potentially. And there was a threat there. And that threat was based on immigration from overseas. Already the nation was being flooded with immigrants from various parts of the world who were coming to America because of the potential of the Industrial Revolution. And remember, the Industrial Revolution had been going on in the North for several years prior to the Civil War. After the war was over, the Industrial Revolution took off in the North. What we're talking about is whether, in fact, it's going to extend into the South. If it was going to do that, if that was to happen, then Washington realized that there would be jobs available. There would be work opportunities available. Social mobility opportunities for Black Americans available. So what he had to do was figure out a way to persuade the white South to include Black Americans in that economic growth process, rather than look to immigrants from overseas. Because the North was being flooded with immigrants coming into the country in order to take advantage of some of the industrial jobs that were being made available in the United States, in the northern industrial cities, not only of the Northeast, but now the Midwest, Chicago and Cleveland and Indianapolis and all of those places that became industrial hubs, Detroit and Chicago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that really is the context. And so what Washington does in his speech is talk to the potential that the South can experience if we're all in this together, but points out that if you do try to industrialize without including us, then we will be an anchor, we will be baggage, we will be a weight, dragging down the progress of the South. Because, as he points out, there are 8 million of us. There are 16 million hands that can work to help make the South great, or become idle and cause problems of crime and idleness and all the rest of it, which will work against the best interests of the South. And what he's basically telling the his white audience is, this is your call, your choice. You've got a big choice to make. Well, given the fact that the Supreme Court rules 3 years later on the legitimacy of segregation, of separate but equal, then it's pretty obvious that Washington's quid pro quo, so-called compromise, didn't work. Washington was willing for Black Americans to start at the bottom, but all of that was contingent on the assumption that once they did agree to take the menial jobs, the lowest level jobs, opportunities for mobility and moving up the ladder would be made available to them. The fact of the matter is, racial separation was much more of a concern to the white South, obviously, than was the potential of industrial growth, because Washington's compromise failed. And it wasn't too many years after that, in the early 20th century, that critics began to emerge criticizing Washington for the sellout of his own people, for a compromise that was all give on one side and no give from the other side. And the major critic, of course, was W.E.B. Du Bois. And again, Washington had accepted political inequality and social inequality in exchange for economic opportunity. He made, and this of course was one of the most most famous sentences in the entire speech, 1895 speech. And I'm taking out my copy of the speech right now because I want to share this with you. Excuse me for a moment. Okay. Washington says, in all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress. In other words, we want economic opportunity, we want jobs, and we want the social mobility opportunities that go with those jobs. But we're not demanding political rights. We're not demanding the suffrage. We're not demanding the right to live in integrated neighborhoods or go to integrated schools or any of that stuff. We'll forego all of that for economic opportunity. Washington obviously is buying into the idea of free enterprise, the theory of free enterprise, fully. He's bought the package. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to racial discrimination, Southern leaders are unwilling to make that theory reality. And for that, Booker T. Washington criticizes, Du Bois criticizes Washington. And this we did yesterday, and this was kind of where we stopped. Du Bois criticized Washington for giving up political power, for giving up their black insistence on civil rights, and giving up higher education for Negro youth. He said the result of the compromise that Washington made was that the Negro was disenfranchised. In other words, he was basically being denied political rights. That compromise helped create, Du Bois said, the legal creation of a distinct status in civil inferiority for the Negro. By accepting second-class citizenship, Du Bois is arguing Washington, in effect, concedes the creation of a distinct, separate status for black Americans, an inferior status, namely second-class citizenship. And third, of course, along with those comes the withdrawal of aid from institutions for the higher training of the Negro. It's very obvious that once this compromise becomes real, then the southern states begin to cut back on the investment in the education and training of black Americans, African Americans. I keep saying African Americans. We know by this time many of the ex-slaves are obviously born in this country, so they are black Americans. But be that as it may, we still have that. We still have that debate. So Du Bois is extremely critical of Washington, and then he lays out his theory for what has to happen in order for black Americans to really gain equality and inclusion in this society. Du Bois says, and I'm reading this as directly from the text, progress in human affairs is more often a pull than a push. I want to pause there. The difference between a pull and a push. The difference between pushing a rope or pulling it. Basically, what Du Bois is talking about is that progress in human affairs, moving up the ladder socially, politically, and economically, real opportunity, Du Bois is saying, requires that there be people at the top that are reaching down and pulling their people up. Washington's idea that you could start at the bottom and just kind of float up is a myth. is a dream, Du Bois is saying. So to continue, Du Bois says, progress in human affairs is more often a pull than a push. A surging forward of the exceptional man, and the lifting of his duller brethren slowly and painfully to his vantage ground. Real progress requires that there be people at the top pulling others up behind them, not everybody congregating at the bottom and assuming that those who have every opportunity in the world to block your ascent up the ladder of opportunity will just get out of the way and let you move up of your own accord. That's what Du Bois is talking about. The exceptional leadership within the black community that is going to carry the responsibility of lifting the entire race behind them. Thus, Du Bois says, it was no accident that gave birth to universities centuries before the common schools, that made fair Harvard the first flower of our wilderness. He points out that before we had universal education to give everybody theoretically educational opportunity, we had colleges and universities. Because his point is that from the very beginning, there was a realization that progress, human progress, was more a pull than a push. You had to have the institutions that produced leaders before you could expect to see real progress amongst the race universally. So in the South, Du Bois says, the mass of the freedmen at the end of the war lacked the intelligence so necessary to modern working men. They must first have the common school to teach them to read, write, and cipher, and they must have higher schools to teach teachers for the common schools. The white teachers who flocked south went to establish such a common school system. Few held the idea of founding colleges. Most of them at first would have laughed at the idea, but they faced, as all men since them have faced, the central paradox of the South, the social separation of the races. In other words, Du Bois is saying, we need to deal with what's real. The reality of the South after the Civil War was the separation of the races. If we're going to create real human progress, real opportunity in this society, then we've got to deal with the realities of a segregated South. And if you focus only on the education and skills of those who are working at the bottom, what you are in effect doing is using the illusion of education to create a workforce that can be exploited. Let me make the point, and I don't want to go off onto a tangent, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't make this point. This is exactly the same issue that we confront today in terms of the needs of education and in terms of the requirements of a skilled workforce. Basically, what we're confronting today is the fact that the employment job opportunities that were available for the unskilled, that have always been available to the unskilled, are no longer there. The most lucrative employment opportunities today are for the highly skilled. You don't get those in the common schools. You don't get those in K through 12. You get those with post-secondary education. What we're talking about is making skill development available to everybody, not just those few people who qualify because they test well or have the talents or whatever. What Du Bois is expressing here is the reality of the world of the post-Civil War South, a segregated world in which black Americans are looked upon as inferior, as second-class citizens. His attack or criticism of Booker T. Washington is because Washington's compromise, in a sense, institutionalized that inferiority, which made it a lot more difficult to overcome it. And so what Du Bois is talking about is many of these well-meaning Northerners who flocked into the South at the end of the Civil War to take teaching positions in the schools and teach basic skills to the ex-slaves. They were well-meaning, good people. Their objective, their goals, were to create an educated workforce for industry. But Du Bois' argument is, if you're really going to have equality, then there needs to be opportunities for these people to move higher, to move up, to be judged not on the color of their skin, but on their abilities and talents and willingness to work and intelligence and commitment and creativity and all of those other things that we associate with an opportunity-based society. Du Bois' argument is the only way you can overcome that in a segregated society is to train leaders, not just followers. If you educate black Americans exclusively as followers, Du Bois is saying, then what you have created is a permanent underclass of labor, unskilled labor, that can be exploited and that will have no chance of moving up into positions of meaningful opportunities and the kinds of job opportunities and entry into the middle class that is associated with an opportunity-based society. I am asking, the reason I wanted to deal with this particular issue, I want all of us to really think about these two options, these two alternatives that Du Bois and Washington are talking about. Du Bois is classified in his time at the beginning of the 20th century as a radical. Why? Why is Du Bois labeled a radical? The assumption in the word radical is that what Du Bois is preaching is threatening. Think about it. What he is really saying is that if we're going to talk the talk of an opportunity-based society, then we have got to make it possible for all people to be included in those opportunities. And in order for that to happen, we need to adopt the same strategies that have always been adopted when human progress is the objective. And that is making sure that there are black Americans in positions of leadership and influence in society that have the opportunity to pull their people up with the rest and take advantage of the opportunities that are there. What that means is that what Du Bois is implying here is the idea of prominent, bright, intelligent, hardworking, creative black Americans being accepted into the upper echelons of American society, in this case, the post-war society in the South. What he is, in a sense, doing is challenging or refuting Washington's strategy, which would commit black Americans to permanent inferiority in an industrial society by denying them the kind of education and the kinds of skills that they would need in order to take advantage of the opportunities that in an economically developing society would present. That really threatens the power structure in the white South. The reason they were willing to jump all over Booker T. Washington's compromise is because Washington wasn't threatening their power. He was basically trying to reason with them and say that and point out that it was to their advantage to give Black Americans real opportunity. Obviously, they chose not to take that deal. They chose to continue to maintain a separate society. And as we mentioned yesterday, that cost the South quality of life for half a century. Because all the way up to the Civil War, the quality of life, income levels, educational levels, all of it in the South was quite a bit behind the rest of the country. So these white leaders in the South accepted what for them was the best deal. Consequently, not only did it result in less development for the South, Washington's prediction came true, but also it laid the groundwork for what's happening in terms of race in this society today. What we have is a population of undereducated, non-motivated, discouraged human beings, and the menial jobs that have always been there for them aren't there anymore. We are paying the price for racial decisions made 100 years ago in this society. And it's very obvious as you watch the elections unfold here in 2016 that we have yet been willing to take the bull by the horns and deal with this issue. And our cities are exploding over it because we've got a real problem on our hands as a society. Because now the job opportunities for low-skilled or unskilled, low-paid working people are not there. There's no place to put these people to work anymore. The economy has moved beyond them. And we denied them the leadership opportunities necessary to begin to take matters into their own hands and work toward the kinds of opportunities that the 21st century economy promises. Consequently, many of these folks are on some sort of assistance. And many working poor whites resent the hell out of it. And that split is really what's informing this election campaign. This is what Hillary Clinton's campaign really is all about. The thing that concerns me is I'm not sure she understands all of that. I'm not sure as yet we're willing to make the kinds of decisions that are necessary to really create an economy, an opportunity-based economy. We've got to do it. Because if we don't, the nation, the republic, can't survive. Because by definition, our political system is an inclusive system. It's a system driven by mass participation. And we've got huge portions of the population that don't feel that they can participate on a fair and equal basis. Not only Black Americans, but underemployed and unemployed poor whites as well. So we've got some major issues to deal with here. I think that we made a horrible mistake in labeling Du Bois a radical and writing him off by putting that label. It's kind of like putting the label of socialist or communist on others who have made proposals in our society. What you are doing is using the power of language and rhetoric to dismiss real, meaningful ideas and suggestions that could help mainstream society. We saw it in the Bernie Sanders campaign. Bernie Sanders was drawing bigger and bigger crowds. The campaign was moving until the issue of socialist entered the picture. And once Bernie Sanders had to carry the label of democratic socialist, suddenly his chore became much more difficult. And as a byproduct of that, Hillary Clinton's opportunities became much more viable. We are not confronting problems. We kick them down the road. We kick the can down the road, as the expression goes when we're talking about the economy. We're dodging some of the most challenging issues. We can't continue to do that because they don't go away. And that's why I believe that this particular document, these two documents, give us so much insight. What Booker T. Washington does for the rest of that document, and I'm not going to continue with it because I want to get to yet another document that he wrote that really elaborates even more fully on this particular theme. What he's talking about is the need for colleges and universities in the South, black colleges and black universities, to educate the leaders who can begin to pull their people up from the depths of poverty and the lack of opportunity in a segregated society. In 1903, Du Bois wrote an article entitled The Talented Tenth. Some of you may recall from your school days that some of our textbooks used to mention with the name Du Bois, if Du Bois was mentioned at all, he was associated with the concept or the idea of the talented tenth. That's what he's talking about. That what we have to do is focus on the brain power in the lower classes, in the African American community. Because only when they are accepted and admitted into positions of influence and power can others of that community expect to follow suit. I'm reading directly from Du Bois' Talented Tenth. The Negro race, like all races, Du Bois says, is going to be saved by its exceptional men. The problem of education, then, among Negroes must first of all deal with the talented tenth. It is the problem of developing the best of this race that they may guide the mass away from the contamination and death of the worst. Like any race, like any other people, Du Bois is saying, we've got a split within the black community. We've got the talented tenth, the potential and the leadership at one end. But at the other end, we've got people who are self-interested, who are looking out for themselves, who are much more interested in their own reputation than they are in commitment to their race. Now the training of men is a difficult and intricate task, he says. Its technique is a matter for educational experts, but its object is for the vision of seers. If we make money the object of man training, we shall develop money makers, but not necessarily men. If we make technical skill the object of education, we may possess artisans, but not in nature men. Men we shall have only as we make manhood the object of the work of the schools. Intelligence, broad sympathy, knowledge of the world that was and is, and of the relation of men to it. This is the curriculum of that higher education which must underlie true life. On this foundation we may build breadwinning, skill of hand, and quickness of brain, with never a fear lest the child and man mistake the means of living for the object of life. What Du Bois is talking about here is true education. Real education that develops the full potential of people, not just their skills, not just their talents, but all the things necessary to make them a true leader. That includes philosophy, it includes the arts, it includes literature, it includes music, it includes the performing arts, all of it. And we need to find our talented people and educate them to assume this leadership position. Because like all peoples throughout history, there is this tendency, this pull in the other direction. We've got to counter that. Let me deal with the issue that prompted this discussion in the first place. The Colin Kaepernick protest by refusing to stand for the national anthem. The fact of the matter is, what we have seen in the 20th century and early in the 21st century in the black community in America, in this country, is the emergence of leaders. But the fact of the matter is, there were leaders and there are leaders. We have Martin Luther King, for example. He was assassinated. But then we have these other prominent black Americans who are accepted as leaders in the black community. Those who always show up whenever there's an urban disturbance in Ferguson or in Baltimore or in Los Angeles or Detroit or wherever it might be. These are the people that Du Bois was warning against, because these are the people who have used these issues and these concerns to make a deal with mainstream society. I will play the kind of leadership role for my community, my people, that the rest of society wants me to play, provided I'm taken care of. It seems to me that what we've got to do is look at these people very carefully in order to make the decision as to whether the livelihood and future of their people is their principal concern, or whether their own future is. And that seems to me to be tied directly with what their strategies are. I'm not challenging or attacking any particular people, any individuals. But what I am saying is that in my lifetime, I have seen numerous leaders in the black community who have been there. They speak at party national conventions. They're on television. They claim to speak for the black community, but they really aren't doing anything to promote or produce change in the nature of our society and how it deals with black Americans. There were some who did. This obviously is the kind of statement that can get you in trouble. But throughout our history, there have been other kinds of leaders besides Du Bois. Black Panthers, Malcolm X. Many people who said the reality of an equal opportunity-based society for everybody in this country is a myth. They don't really mean it. The only thing that we can do is separate from it and take care of ourselves. That threatens the hell out of mainstream society. We worry about segregation. We worry about black teachers in our black classrooms because we're not sure what they're doing there, what they're saying there. They could be fomenting revolution rather than the dream, the American dream of equal opportunity for everybody, which many of them don't believe is real anyway. I think that this whole issue is coming to a head in this Kaepernick protest. Because I think that there are some people who are jumping on the bandwagon because they can gain visibility from it. It makes them look good. It makes them look like they really care and all the rest of it. And then there are others who sincerely are committed to the best interests of their people and who really want to see mainstream society, who really want to see the values and the principles and the vision associated with the national anthem to be put into practice in this society for everybody, not just for some. I think we need to make these distinctions. We need to look very carefully at who we're talking about and what they stand for and what they do, not just what they say, but what they do. I think the same thing is true in the issues of gender. I think right now it's very, very popular. It's very acceptable to be appalled by the comments of Donald Trump and the things he says about women. The whole nation is appalled, is disgusted. And his political supporters are torn because they're trying to walk the fine line between acknowledging their disgust with the comments, but maintaining the only political reality they believe they have in this election. So they're trying to criticize Trump and support him at the same time. It seems to me that that reality speaks to what we're talking about here. It speaks to the difference between Washington and Du Bois in the area of civil rights and race. When we talk about an inclusive society, we talk about a society where there's real opportunity for everybody and everybody has a shot. And it's a society that rewards talent and ability and hard work and all the rest of it. If we continue to talk that talk, we've got to mean it. It's hard to believe for many people that we believe that when we see more and more people moving into gated communities and posting armed guards around where they live to keep the wrong people out, to keep out the riffraff, as it were. We've got a society today which is experiencing the kind of economic growth which is creating more and more riffraff. It's creating true, real, meaningful opportunities for fewer and fewer people. And it's discarding more and more people into the category of riffraff, or what Jefferson called residue. All of this means that the difference between the illusion and the reality of American society are becoming more and more real to more and more people. People are beginning to see the hypocrisy that oftentimes informs and explains the nature of our society. And the result is that people tend to be withdrawing into groups. We're becoming more and more a divided society rather than an integrated society, rather than a united society. E pluribus unum is becoming little more than what's printed on our money. The whole idea of from many one is being more and more difficult to find for gays, for women, for African Americans, for Hispanics, for the working poor, for the disabled. We have got to begin to understand the nature and the essence of this society. It is potentially an exceptional society. But damn it, we've got to make it that. We can't believe that it already is. We can't believe with Donald Trump that we're going to make society great again. Because for too many people, society has never been great. We have got to put flesh, meat, on the bones of our rhetoric. We absolutely have to do it. I believe that every youngster in every history or civics class in this nation ought to read these two documents. If it takes a month, if it takes 6 months, because the whole nature of our society, what Madison and Jefferson and Hamilton and the rest of them were talking about, what the Federalist Papers are written about, is incorporated in these documents. The reason we have a representative government, the reason we have eliminated the restrictions on voting and opened up the process to everybody, is because Madison believed, as he said in that very famous 1929 piece in his journal, we have got to use political equality, the right to vote, as an alternative to give people some skin, to give people a vested interest in this society, because only if they believe they have it will they support it. Will they fight for it? Will they die for it? And if you're denying certain groups of people because of their color, because of their religion, because of their nationality, because of their accent, because of who they sleep with, if you're denying these people the opportunity that you continue to talk about, you're being a hypocrite. And if you deal with those who raise these difficult questions as radicals and communists and troublemakers and terrorists and all the rest of it, you are not solving problems. You are postponing them and dodging them. You are kicking the can down the road. And at some point in time, somebody down there is going to kick it right back in our face. So it's time we get about it, folks. I really mean that. I think that this may be the most important hour that we've done in some time here at the Virtual Center. We've reached the top of the hour. It is exactly 2 p.m. in the East. We're right at the top of the hour. I can't believe it's almost like I planned it, huh? We're going to pause for a break. I kind of need one a little bit. I thought it was warm today, but it's a little bit warmer right now than it was an hour ago. We're going to take a 5-minute break and use the opportunity to go out and stretch our legs and get some air and maybe go to the bathroom or get a glass of water or a can of pop or something. Then we'll come back for our second hour. If this issue is one that you would like to weigh in on, then by all means, when we come back after our break, feel free to call at 304-663-4676. Agnes is in the Head On Radio Network studios. She'll get you on the air. We would love to hear from you. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a short break. We'll be right back with our second hour. Please stay with us. Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to the second hour of today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I think that if you've been with us from the very beginning of our program today through the first hour, we dealt with the question of civil rights, but I think we actually went a little bit beyond the issues of race and began to touch on other issues as well. But I think there's no question that the civic responsibility aspect of the mission of the Virtual Center was on display here. This is really, it seems to me, so critically related to, so much a part of what the structure and organization and operation of this political system that we call the Republic, the American Republic, is all about. It seems to me that to teach or try to teach American government without including some of this stuff is woefully deficient and impossible. Because it seems to me that one must begin to recognize the link, the connection between the structure of the government and how it was designed to function and the realities of the society for which it was created. I think that one of the things we've seen over the years here at the Virtual Center is the depth of preparation and research that Madison, especially Madison, and the others did in putting this republic together. And Madison talked about in so many of the Federalist Papers that the genius of the American people is representative government. A republic, a representative republic, speaks to the genius of the American people. We've seen that. We've read it over and over again. I only think that when you get into these kinds of issues, can you begin to appreciate what that really means. That's why I worry so much about the nature of the political election campaign that we're experiencing in this country now, because everybody says, without really knowing what it means, and I don't know what it means, what the details of it are either. But in fact, this morning I was talking to a friend, and she made the point of talking about the election and how glad she'll be when it's over, that this system will never be the same again. We'll never get over this campaign, is what she was saying. Now, how that might work, how that might play out, she doesn't know. I don't know. None of us know. But there's no question that an awful lot of this political system is based on faith, on trust, on the abilities of people, different kinds of people, if you will, different races, religions, genders, all the rest of it, to find ways to live together in peace and harmony. That's the basis of this society. It's created on the assumption that that's the society we're moving on. If we don't move in that direction, if we continue to move apart rather than together, then the form of government that the founders gave us becomes inoperable. It can't work. How can you have a government based on mass participation when people can't communicate, when people won't speak to each other, when people throw darts at each other, call each other vicious names, attack their mothers and their fathers and their children, and all the rest of it, attack their disability? All of these things, it seems to me, work in the opposite direction of where we need to be going. This campaign is filled with it. That's what those people that are willing to close their eyes and continue to support the campaign are doing. They are literally playing with fire. They are, in a sense, doing the kind of damage to this system that I'm not sure we can recover from. Many of the things that we never dreamed in our lives would become part of our political campaigns are now included.
Bill?
Yes, Agnes?
I hate to interrupt, but we have Horzak on the line.
Oh, that's fine. Sure, that's great.
Hold on one second.
Thank you. Horst. Horst, are you there?
Hold on one second, Bill.
That's okay.
I'm here now.
Hey, how we doing?
There we are. Oh, give me just a second. I'm sorry. I've left a media player running. I should not have done
that's okay.
That. Okay.
All right. Good deal.
Oh, there we go. Okay, great.
Okay, good.
Good to talk to you again.
Well, you sound great.
Yeah, 4x4 over here too. So
the communication connection is great.
Oh, terrific.
You sound like you're right in the next room.
Isn't that true? That's crazy, isn't it? I mean, like,
yeah, it really is.
If you remember back far enough, like with transatlantic phone cables and stuff like that, like it used to be the case that if you were, we're trans-Pacific here, I guess in this instance, but you would have to say something and you'd have to wait like 6 or 7 seconds for the reply to come back to you.
Yeah,
and boy, we are so spoiled in this generation.
It's interesting. I was just thinking in the same vein that we have a 2-story house here, and we have one of those phone systems where we have 4 different extensions. We have a phone in 4 different rooms.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know how to do it. My wife does, and she'll be upstairs, and she can basically ring me on the phone, and from right above me, speak. And the point is, you don't sound any different, and you're 5,000 miles away. It's amazing.
Worse than that. I think it's like more like 10,000, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm not really sure.
Probably, yeah.
I don't know how it breaks down. I look into this every now and then, but yeah, anyway.
Well, I don't want to dominate the conversation because I really want to hear from you.
No, yeah, for sure. And it's one of those situations where you've been following this theme for like the last couple of days, and it's really hard to pick one point and say, well, let's talk about that. But one thing that I just been kind of reminded of by this whole election, if you recall, I guess you've been doing this program for like 3 years or better, right?
3.5 years approximately, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So somewhere in the early on, like in the first year, maybe within the first couple of months, even if you recall this, I sent you an email that you shared with a class of seniors that you were teaching, like on a once weekly basis or something like that.
Yeah.
About
you got a wonderful memory. I remember this, but I can't remember the email.
Well, no, I had the same thing with my students. Like when I teach my students, I struggle remembering their names, and I always tell them, it's like, well, look, there's 20 of you and there's one of me. It's like it's easier for you to remember me, but like I have to. So you get like so much feedback that I'm one speck. In a sea of emails and things that you'd have to deal with. So yeah, that's understandable. But anyway, yeah, there was this one email I sent you a long time ago about how Republican obstructionism just the idea, the whole policy of just shutting everything down and to make the people agitated and dissatisfied with the government they're getting in order to make them switch to our brand. I mean, I floated the ideas like, is this not somewhat like treason if you think about it in terms of like when it like affects our vital infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
Like what happens in a state like Minnesota when a bridge collapses and people actually die? When the funds were there, if only the both houses of Congress approved of it and let the spending go through, and the only reason it was withheld was just to just for political machinations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I see that going on in this election cycle, like amped up to a tremendous degree. Everything is party first, and when I say everything, I think mostly at this point, I mean typically on the Republican side. I understand that the Democratic Party is not exactly clean and pure.
No.
In everything that motivates them, but for the most part, if you're going to find even any iota of public service as a motivation for what parties do, it's all completely one-sided at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, that sounds like a departure from the subject you've been talking about for the last couple of days, but
I'm not sure it is. No,
it bleeds over into everything, including race relations and social justice and how we value people according to different demographics. I mean, whether it's ethnic or racial or religious or based on income. Really, there is an entire politics around withholding from this side to promote this side, and it's such a huge subject. It's really hard to find a point to focus on and discuss that. Like that's where we need to go,
right?
So
right. I know.
But I wanted to say something
because let me. Just before we took our break at the top, I was relating it to the nature of our political system, of the representative republic that we have. And the fact of the matter is, the nature of the society we have pretty much helps define the political system we have. In other words, the two are in sync. But increasingly, with these kinds of issues separating us and our inclination to go to separate rather than to come together, we are rendering the political system inoperative. It's totally out of whack with the reality of the society we have today. And you're right. I mean, so what you get is government shutdowns and screaming at each other. And I don't know. I mean, it's just, I think you're really onto something.
Well, in a different era, that's what they used to describe to me as factions. Mm-hmm. That to me is the essence of what faction is. We only have power if we organize and adopt some position. Now, it may not be a position that any single one of us actually agrees with, but at least it's a positive, proactive step to get something done that approximates something that we all agree with. And to me, that kind of goes back to the whole idea of the difference that the founders used to talk about in terms of how an individual might respond to a situation and how groups of people get together and form consensus around it. Mm-hmm. Or groupthink versus just an individual making a decision.
Right.
And our political system rewards, far and away, groups and people acting as a mob with a mob mentality, and it does very, very little to reward or even acknowledge individual brilliance or innovation or what have you, as far as that goes.
I think, and I'm kind of getting into Madison here a little bit, and I'm trying to relate him, because he made the distinction. The people who play to these divisions, to these factions, are what Madison called demagogues. And what they're doing is they're playing to what's popular because it enhances them and their reputation and their position and all that. But what Madison talked about in number 10 was the need to create statesmen who would be able to put the public interest ahead of their own private interest. And that's what we're lacking.
You know what that takes me back to? You know what that takes me back to? That takes me back to, you know, a theme that you've referred to many times on this program. It's Socrates in the cave, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, like, statesman is someone who has actually been to the mountaintop, who has seen has got the whole thing, and they come back and look, you know, it's not.
And they meet nothing but resistance.
Yeah, well, not only that, but this is one thing I actually called in about maybe a year or two ago about. I was not able to clearly articulate the idea, but what if other people had been to that same mountaintop and they decided to deliberately thwart, you know, the outcome of that would be best for all in order to favor a few. And I think we really see clear evidence of that kind of activity in our political system.
Yeah. I mean, the gymnastics that Republican leadership is going through in order to not disavow Trump, and at the same time they have to separate themselves from what he says, and it's really interesting to watch them squirm, because they're literally talking out of both sides of their mouth, because politically they don't see themselves as having any choice except to support him, especially now with the election so close. But at the same time, they can't support him fully because he's making it impossible to support him fully. I mean, he's saying and doing some absolutely horrendous things. I mean, he's jeopardizing the whole political system by questioning its legitimacy and its fairness. Mm-hmm. My God, I mean, we'll never recover from that.
Well, yeah. Recovery, that's setting that aside for a second. I mean, let's ignore the elephant. All right, let's ignore the elephant in the room for a moment. But like, here's the clearest example of this kind of putting party first. Look at what John McCain's statements. We're going to, he's already preparing for a situation, a scenario in which, look, we're not going to win the presidency because look at this guy. Yeah. So Hillary's going to win. So what are we going to do? Okay, well, you know, we're going to obstruct all of her Supreme Court appointments. If it takes 8 years, we're not going to pass anything. We're going to filibuster the whole thing simply because we can, assuming that they control the Senate or they beat the 60 vote threshold or whatever. Yeah. This is the same guy who ran back in 2008 on the platform of country first. Yeah. Country first. Think about that. I mean, if that is not the ultimate repudiation of that principle, this is party first. Yeah. And it's so naked. It is so there. It's for anybody to see. But the only people that remember it are, you know, diehard political fanatics or students of history, because history is politics in the past, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And media people. That's it. Everybody else can only remember back apparently 2 or 3 years at the most, and that's even asking too much. Yeah.
This is really disappointing, you know, because I think I include myself in this, I think many of us saw John McCain as being the closest to what we have in the Republican Party that would qualify or might qualify for the label of statesman. And this is
honest broker.
And this is really working against that. You're right. When you mention honest broker, I mean, he was the one that organized that group to go in there and find ways to compromise on some of these things in order to keep government operative. And now listen to him. You know, I mean, it's very, very disturbing in his case. And in fact, Trump if you remember early in the primaries, took him on directly. And yet he's continuing to support him in spite of some of the things that Donald Trump has said and done. And it really is. It's quite disturbing, because the way the system worked was that there were these leaders in both parties who could come together and work together and overcome these factions within, on each side of the aisle, so to speak. Now they're gone, and the demagogues have, and I think technology has a lot to do with it. I really think that technology has given these people the opportunity to become much more influential than they ever could be before.
Yeah, I think that may be a temporary adjustment as we get used to this technology. Suddenly everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems as though, if you remember, oh boy, what was his name? The guy, the 15 Minutes of Fame guy, Andy Goodlord. I can't believe I'm blanking on his, the pop artist from the 1970s, saying everybody would get 15 minutes of fame.
Andy Warhol.
Yes.
Andy Warhol. Yeah.
Yeah, we're having like that whole Warhol thing was like a prophecy, but the thing is, it keeps narrowing. It's no longer 15 minutes; it gets shorter and shorter. But it gets more democratic in the sense that, seriously, everybody gets their say as the medium, the technology, social media expands.
Mm-hmm.
We all get something.
Yeah,
not all of us equally deserve a share of attention. I mean, again, if you think about that, that goes back to this one of the principles that the founders were struggling with when trying to form a democratic society versus a republic versus this and that. And it's funny, we've been struggling with these same things all the time, but because of technological advances, we're reaching a crisis point. We've got to figure this out. There's got to be a balance.
Right.
There has to be a balance between representation and also properly evaluating the quality of the input you're getting. And that's where we fall down. We have no way of evaluating what's good input and what's bad input. It just all comes out. He said, she said. Well, there's controversy. Who knows?
Well, there's one of the pieces that, and I'm not going to do it now, but I think we'll maybe do it in a later program. But today, and I think in today's Washington Post, I believe, there's an article in the op-ed page called "The Decline of the West and How to Stop It," and it's co-authored by Javier Solana, who, and I've got his biography here. Javier Solana is former foreign minister of Spain, representative of the European Union's Common Foreign and Security Policy, and Secretary General of NATO. And the other co-author, is Strobe Talbot, who's president of the Brookings Institute. He used to be in the State Department. And basically what they're doing is looking at what's happening in the world. And what you're saying right now fits perfectly into what they're saying, that that we're reaching a crisis point. And that's exactly what they're saying. We have got to find ways to work through some of these issues. They point, for example, to the issue of global trade, commerce. And their argument is the whole structure and basis of Western civilization over the last several hundred years has been based on the idea that trade and interaction between nations and peoples and continents and all the rest of it would lift all boats. And what we've done with these trade agreements is make serious dents in poverty in underdeveloped parts of the world. But we've done it at the expense of the developed countries who've lost jobs. And I think that... Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's about half the picture. But let's not forget, a couple hundred years ago, there was also the resource colony model of economics, where we set up a colony. I mean, like, you're living in the middle of it there in Appalachia, right? I mean,
exactly. Right.
Where we move in and extract all the value from here, where we reward a few people who in turn will act as overseers for their poor benighted brethren, and we're going to just suck that whole place dry And then you also have neoliberal expansionist policies where we're trying to make the rest of the entire world safe for capitalism.
Right.
And exporting and trying to grow a sufficient middle class to buy crap.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, like products.
You're right.
That's
products.
that's
Products is, well, I don't know. I was going to say products better than crap. Maybe not. You know?
But I mean, like, I don't know how else to put it. So
last
there's
week,
also that.
You know, last week at one of the Meet the Candidates events that I'm involved in here, and I've been going to many of them, but I can't remember what day it was. One night last week, anyway, I went to one of these events, and it was on a Tuesday night. And the guy I'm running against, who I've talked to him and gotten to know him a little bit, but I don't really know him that well. He's well known in this community. He taught school here and all of that, so people know him really well. But and he seems like a very, very nice guy. But anyway. One of the issues that we were talking about in the interaction with the audience was the building of a pipeline here in southern West Virginia, which is going to make it possible to transport gas through West Virginia into Virginia and into South Carolina. And two major energy companies, Duke Energy in North Carolina and Dominion Energy in Virginia, are really funding these two projects, these two huge pipelines. And one of the counties that's in my district, the projected pipeline would run right through their county. It's pretty much agricultural. And it's very, very hot issue. And people are protesting and, about every time I speak, the first question they ask me is, how do you feel about the pipeline? And literally, that's, that basically replaces, are you a Christian? It's that important.
Oh, God, yeah.
And anyway, so we were talking about the pipeline and whether, what in fact this state would get out of it. And my opponent, because he's the incumbent, he had the first opportunity to respond to this question about the pipeline. One of the members of the audience said, I'd like everybody on the panel up there to express themselves on the pipeline. So my opponent was, since he's the incumbent, he was given first shot. And he stood, this absolutely burned its way into my brain. He was talking about the whole issue. And then finally he said, folks, sometimes this is painful, but we need to deal with reality. He said, here in West Virginia, our whole existence has been based on finding things to sell that people want to buy. And we can't change that. The future of West Virginia is based on the idea that we need to keep finding things that people will buy so that we can keep selling it off.
I remember you mentioning this last week.
And I absolutely almost fell off the chair. I started
that's a mouthful, isn't it? Boy,
oh my God. I couldn't. It's everything that's wrong. It was everything. And I started to foam at the mouth. I couldn't wait to get up there, And but it turned out to be a really good conversation because it made the issue. And basically what I was saying, what I said is that's our past, but it doesn't define our future. Basically, if we don't change it, look what's happening in the coal fields. That's going to happen with the gas too. It happened in coal. It's going to happen in gas. And ultimately, it seems to me, we need to begin to develop a different model. And then I basically began to emphasize the idea of investing in people and in improving our educational system and not continue to cut education budgets and all of that. We need to basically invest in improving our education system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because right. I keep talking about a new West Virginia and stuff, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. But the difference between his position and mine on this issue for that audience was absolutely dramatic. Nobody left the room with not knowing exactly where he stood and where I stood and what the issue was. I mean, it was clear as it was black and white. It was.
And this goes back to what you were saying on Monday. I believe it was Monday. You said that there might be certain people that question your motives for joining the race, as though you were just trying something new because tired.
Why not?
Trying to try something else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great. But no, I mean, like, even win or lose. I mean, like, getting those issues out there and creating a genuine discussion with real points. I mean, we have. You know what? If you hadn't been there, can you just imagine, Dr. Bill, if you had not been there to refute that point? I mean, like, to you and me, that is so astonishingly. I mean, like, blatant.
Yeah,
it's right there. It's like it's like saying this is a good. It's like defending, deciding to take up a drug habit.
Yeah.
Let's just squeeze everything out of this until it's all gone, baby. And then when it's all gone, who cares?
Here's a sheet of paper. On this side, we're going to give all the positives of a drug habit. And on the other side, we're going to give all the negatives.
We're going to have fun. We're going to have fun until it's all gone. And at that point, who cares anymore? Because we'll all be dead.
That's exactly what he was saying. I mean, if you take that to the next level, because the obvious question is, and when we run out of stuff to sell, what happens then?
We'll move to Pennsylvania. What? I mean, like that. What happens? And look, what would have happened if you were not there? Can you imagine if you had not been participating in that discussion? Would anybody else have actually stepped up and refuted that idea?
Oh, I couldn't believe.
What if you hadn't done that?
Well, the guy that's running with me, he's the other Democrat in the race. When he got up, he started to talk about. We don't need a pipeline. We can move the stuff by railroad. After all, our railroad industry is suffering too. Right. Yeah, and I thought, my God, that proposes two ways of not changing.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. But anyway,
it would have been the same thing.
That's kind of what that's kind of what this is becoming. And. But I was going to make a comment when you were talking about the race. There's a Meet the Candidates thing here in Beckley, West Virginia, tomorrow morning. It starts at 7 a.m. and ends at 9, and it's going to be broadcast on one of the local radio stations. And all the candidates for all the different offices are going to be on a panel. And so the Chamber of Commerce is organizing the thing, and they called me yesterday to give me the ground rules. And the ground rules are you're going to have 90 seconds to speak.
Oh, boy.
And I said, oh, my God, 90 seconds. It takes me that long to say hello,
Make it good.
Good. So, but anyway.
Are you on a panel of other Democratic candidates? Is that how that works?
It'll be Democrats and Republicans, I'm guessing. Everybody was invited, Republicans and Democrats, opponents for different offices. And it usually attracts about 400 people. It's a big event. I've been going to it every year for the last 7 or 8 years. And
okay, so you know how it
goes. It's a big event. Yeah, one of the local businesses provides a egg and sausage breakfast and coffee and all the rest of it. So I mean, you can go there and get free breakfast and sit in the armory and hear this 2-hour program. And but 90 seconds. I mean, with these kinds of issues, I mean, what can you do in 90 seconds? Actually, I have an idea what I'm going to do, but it's really kind of. I mean, I just said, yeah, fine, great, and I thought to myself, good God, I mean, this is. But on the other hand, you got to be there because if the strongest message you could send to these folks is if you weren't there.
To show up. Right.
Yeah, it's failing to show up. I mean, you'd be the fact that you were missing would be much more significant than it's going to be because you're there. But anyway. This subject that you've been talking about, I mean, the point you've made, I think, is the point that began to overwhelm me as I was thinking about how to present this. It really touches on so many different things. I mean, the gender issue, the women's issue, Trump's attitude and comments about women and all the rest of it. And what you get is the you get the people that are offended because they're supposed to be offended, and everybody expects you to be offended. And then you get the people who really are. And they're saying, okay,
Right.
what can we do about this? But like in the civil rights question, in the issue of racial relations in this society, we really have done everything we can do to silence the people who have come forward and say, all right, what can we do about this? And you know, we've called them all sorts of names and put labels on them and everything else in order to dismiss their point of view as radical or out of the realm of reality or all these other things. And the result is we've never really dealt with the issue because we haven't been able to.
Well, that's the nature of an institution. I mean, like, we have institutions in place. This is how things go.
Yeah.
And if someone stands up and challenges, you know, it's like trying to turn a ship on a dime. That is very hard for like an individual or even a movement to do. But again, that is also kind of an interesting consequence of the social media phenomenon. Like with the Colin Kaepernick example, for instance. I mean, like, if he had done that 20 years ago, just some guy in the NFL who decided I'm not going to stand up for the national anthem, they would have drummed him out, no problem, and nobody would have even known about it. It might have been a story in the local papers at best. It would not have been a national thing. It would not have been a viral thing. And for damn sure, it would not be something that a story that people are following in Taiwan or China, or like all over the world, as they most assuredly are. People are really paying attention to these things, you know, because the whole the internet and the social media makes it possible for people to really keep up on things of interest to them. And let's face it, America and our politics, including our racial politics, are very interesting outside of our borders because it's quite relevant. What we do, you know, America catches a cold, the world, you know, dies. Sometimes. But beyond that, though, this is one of those situations. Like living in Taiwan, I don't get a very clear image of how the American presidential election campaign is playing out, because people here really don't care as much about that as like in other countries.
Yeah.
So it's hard to gauge international response here. But like, I guarantee you, people in Europe are like wondering what in the world is going on over there.
Oh yeah. And you know, is this article that I mentioned about the decline of the West that's in today's Washington Post? One of the things they point out, which I think is really relevant to this, is that with the flood of immigrants coming into Europe now, and European nations being overwhelmed with migrants, with people coming in from predominantly Syria.
Right.
The question is, you know, everybody is talking about what you do with these people, but many European countries have isolated them, have put them into camps, and have allocated portions of cities and all the rest of it. So they're creating, you know, little ghettos for these people. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, that's the way people deal with people who are different. But at the same time, what they talk about is that ultimately inclusion of these people into the mainstream of European society ultimately has to be the answer.
Right.
It has to be. And so the question is, how do you do that? Because, I mean, you can't even mention that. I mean, you know, in this country, for example, with Donald Trump being one of the candidates, Hillary's talking about admitting X numbers of thousands more Syrian immigrants into this country, and he's castigating her for it. I mean, he's blasting her for that and saying, you know, all of these terrorists and potential terrorists, and we don't know who these people are or where they come from or anything else. And given the climate of the country right now, he's getting a lot of attention. It's carrying a lot of weight, what he's saying, and that's the danger. In other words, her efforts to try to present a moderate point of view on these things are being attacked, and that speaks to what the nature of our problems are.
That reminds me of a couple of points. One is a general argument about extending the benefits of, like, say, health care or disability insurance or something like that across a broad spectrum of people, or affirmative action, or allowing extra immigrants in, is people who have it very well, who actually live quite good lives, but their quality of life has not grown significantly over a long period of time. They look at other people whose quality of life are rapidly increasing, and they look at the rate of increase, and they compare it to, like, where they are now, and they're saying, like, my life is not getting any better, and that makes them jealous in a kind of a way. That's one measure of that, and at the other, one of the things that was probably one of the most heartbreaking things I've seen America do. I mean, there's been a handful of things, unfortunately, in the last 15 years since I moved to Taiwan. Number one of which will always be the invasion of Iraq. But after that, probably the most just disappointing thing I ever saw in my life was the reaction at the border when buses of, refugees from the Honduras and Guatemala came over, were trying to go into Texas, and there were groups of people with signs up, like, saying, "Go back, send them out, kick them out," and we're talking about children. Yeah, and that was a few years ago, and now the same thing with Syria, like, as though with the Syrian thing, it's a bit different situation because there's the additional element of the whole religious, xenophobia there. I don't want to make a sympathetic argument about that, but that's a complicating factor. Let's just say that. But
you mentioned affirmative action, and that is really a key ingredient of this whole thing, because initially, if you look at the whole idea of affirmative action, the idea of quotas was never part of it, and the whole idea of affirmative action was to create a procedure or a mechanism that could make the kinds of things that Du Bois was talking about work. Quotas are a way to make sure that doesn't work. And so in essence, the introduction of quotas into the conversation about affirmative action has really sidetracked the real point of affirmative action. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it's like translating the spirit of the idea into the letter.
Yeah, and because what it does is it creates hostility and animosity among groups when the whole purpose of affirmative action is to counter that. I mean, basically, when you say that a certain number of these jobs are going to go to people based on their color, or a certain number of slots in law schools and colleges and all the rest of it are going to be reserved for minorities, then what you're doing is that's very, very divisive. And so, in a sense, those people that pushed the issues of quotas in the name of affirmative action have really done damage. And the only question is whether they realize. I can't believe that they actually knew what they were doing and still did it.
No, a lot of people that pushed the policies probably didn't understand what the actual
no, exactly
impetus behind the policy was. They were just there to enforce a policy.
Right.
And so they would create their own understanding, and with their own understanding, that would be how they would explain it to other people why we need to do this. Well, we need to do this because we need a certain number of people as a quota. And anybody listening to that is like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. There's we've gone back and forth on the kind of the developmental side of the psychology behind these things. Look, when I was a high school student, if you talked to me about affirmative action programs, to me, I knew a ton of very disadvantaged Caucasian high school students, and the only reason they were not going to college, and it wasn't because they were white or black or anything like that, it was because they didn't have the money, and that's it. And so at that time, at my level of understanding, with my life experience, you could not explain to me how it is appropriate to offer, an extra compensation to students, black students, for instance, because that's mostly what affirmative action was at the time. Mm-hmm. To me, I would say, well, that's racist because you're drawing the line on racism, and that was my genuine, sincere, heartfelt opinion. It's like, it's not race, it's money. I know lots of people who deserve to go to college that can't go, and they're gonna work at Burger King for the rest of their lives, and that's not fair. And that's what you're dealing with when you're trying to, put a top-down thing on a policy like that, and especially when you put like quotas, because quotas can be enforced by people who don't understand why you want to implement these policies. Right? They don't get. Well, we're compensating for a whole lot of factors that even the poor white folks are not subject to. Right. And you don't understand that. You don't understand that if you grow up from that background until you get older and you see and you watch the world in operation. That is the entire essence of psychological development. The negative fallout from affirmative action, of course, is that what you build up is a hostility in the face of the end of hostility, which is the initial objective. And not only by creating the number of slots, but the fact of the matter is you create an impression that every black American that has a good job got it because they're black, not because they're qualified. And so it works in so many ways negative, contradictory to what the purpose of the program is. And it also sends the unspoken message to people who don't get it that if you're white, you're less important. We don't care about you anymore. You're just going to live in your town where jobs have dried up, and everybody is addicted to prescription medicine or methamphetamines or something like that, and we're just going to let you die. Mm-hmm. And that's what they see happening. And so a person, a demagogue, a Donald Trump can feed on that. Who doesn't even know. No, I mean that's the weirdest thing about Donald Trump. And in fact, it may be a uniquely qualifying prerequisite for a person like that to even step into this role. Is he's like the only guy who can speak the language that people hear, who doesn't understand what he's actually saying. Yeah, but he understands just enough to know to follow the quality of the feedback he gets. Like, oh, they like it when I say this, they don't like it when I say that. So oh my God, that's great. Come in here. Yeah. Oh my God, that's perfect. But it really is that kind of situation. He's the guy that the Republican Party has been producing, working for since Lee Atwater stepped in, back in the 80s. Yeah. But no one would ever dare to do that because nobody was that audacious, because nobody was that crazy. No. Or no, well, not that crazy. He's not crazy. He's what he is. But anybody else that would try to step in and fulfill the role he is, they would have to be crazy to do it. He just naturally fits the bill somehow. He's really just there to generate positive feedback towards himself, and he literally has no appreciation for anything other than what gets him the best response. And we have a population and a media that is just, it's a perfect storm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a perfect storm up to about 40 to 45%. Yeah. We'll find out how perfect a storm it is, but this is the only moment in American history that this could have happened. Come what may, one way or the other. We probably won't be. Good Lord! I did send you. I sent you a story a few weeks ago. There is one danger in this. Some future Karl Rove is going to tap into what makes Donald Trump so effective as a spokesman to that, that rabid base, the people who detect their way of life coming to an end and who feel existentially threatened. Mm-hmm. And there is some truth to that. There's some truth to that. And we're going to get trained people who are
focused on touching that nerve.
Someone is going to be able to extract the essence of what Trump does that gets people all excited, and they're going to be able to teach that to somebody who actually is a capable politician. I mean, good Lord, Ted Cruz, he's smart enough. They could just teach it to him. All they have to do is teach him, how to not be so creepy on camera. But otherwise, but he's smart enough to get everything else. He can manipulate people. He's good at that.
One of the things that I heard about the debate tonight, the third debate, which is I found this fascinating, and basically it was one of the talk shows, and the guy was saying, I'm not going to watch the debate tonight. I know everything I need to know. And basically what he said is, we've seen 2 debates, so we know what Donald Trump's about. And we know now, the polls are telling us that Hillary Clinton's so far ahead that she's going to play defense. She's not going to risk anything tonight. So therefore, you can miss this debate and really not miss anything. And I wondered, and I said, I wonder how many people are going to buy into that. I mean, they've anticipated that these debates are going to get record audiences. I'm really interested to see whether the one tonight does, or whether, in fact, that. Because I've talked to a number of people that say, I may watch it if I'm around, but I'm not going to worry about it if I miss it. And because I think everything that I need to know, I know. And, I don't know how, it'll be kind of interesting to see if tonight's is a much lower audience than the other 2.
I have a hard time even predicting stuff like that. I mean, I always watch every debate just because. Oh,
I watch them.
That's again, as a student of history, you can't call yourself a lover of history if you don't pay attention to current events, because it's the same thing, just different time, right? So
that's really interesting. I mean, I kind of revealed myself a little bit with my wife, because she's working today, and she said, I think I'm going to go to, she has a place in about a half an hour from here. And she said, I think tonight I'm going to, since I have to be to work so early in the morning, I think I'm just going to go over and stay at 7th Avenue tonight. And I, of course, all I could think of was the debate tonight. And I said, great, and that was the wrong thing to say, And she said, you mean you don't even care whether I come home or not? And I said, no, I didn't mean that, but I am focused on the debate tonight, But anyway, so, wow, I'll tell you, this is these hours. When you call, I'm telling you that part of the program just flies right by. I can't believe it. I'm looking at the clock.
Oh
here.
Yeah, right.
3 minutes left, for God's sake.
I about burned you out again. Well, look, after next week, I believe actually after tomorrow, we go into daylight savings again. So it gets more difficult. The bar gets raised for me being able to call in, because it gets late over here. Yeah. So
you lose an hour. Yeah,
I do.
Oh, so. Listen. I thoroughly enjoy it. This is the highlight of my week so far, at least on this program. Having you call, it's just been great.
Well, given that you're actually a candidate for office this cycle, I might try to call back in 1 or 2 more times before the whole thing is over. But generally speaking, I would normally have to kind of go on hiatus at this point.
Yeah,
but
I know. Listen, I appreciate so much you call. It's been great.
It's absolutely delightful for me too. I'll let you wrap it up and.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Godspeed.
Okay. Godspeed to you too. Thank you. Wow. We've got 2 minutes left in the program, and just time enough to say goodbye and to thank Horst, and thank you, the listeners, for this. I did believe all the time that I kept promising that we were going to go into this Du Bois, Booker T. Washington thing, that once you get into that, you really get into everything, because all the different pieces start to come together. It's that important. It explains that much about the nature of our society. And if you focus on one or the other aspect of it, you miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. This document seems to force you to look at the forest. And once you do, I think you begin to see things so much more clearly. We are at 59 minutes after the hour. I want to thank you, all of you, for putting up with me for yet another week. And I know that it'll be 5 days before we get together again. And Lord knows what's going to happen between now and then. It seems like when we come in on Mondays, it's a little bit of this, that, and everything else. But I hope that you have a great, great weekend and a wonderful evening tonight. Please be safe. Take care of yourself. Hug those that you care about, that are closest to you. And love the people who love you, because we never know. Thank you so very, very much for tuning into the Virtual Center. I want to thank Agnes and the folks at Head On Radio Network. Agnes, thank you for putting Horst on. That just made the program today, I do believe. Have a great week. Have a great evening. And thank you so very, very much for your continued support. Appreciate it.